What if I told you that the most valuable thing you own isn't your money, your possessions, or even your time? It's your attention. And every single day, without realizing it, you're giving it away. You hand it to people who don't respect you. You give it to situations that exhaust you. You surrender it to distractions, arguments, worries, and a world that constantly competes for control of your focus. Think about that for a moment. There is a currency you've been spending your entire life, often without thinking twice about it. That currency is your attention. And like any valuable resource, the more carelessly you spend it, the less power it holds. Every unnecessary argument, every emotional reaction, every moment spent obsessing over things outside your control, they're all withdrawals from your most valuable account. The more you react to everything around you, the more control other people gain over your focus, and the less control you have over your own life. But imagine for a moment what could happen if you started taking that power back. Imagine waking up tomorrow and becoming intentional about where your attention goes. What would your life look like if you invested your focus only in the people, goals, and experiences that genuinely added value to your life? What if your energy stopped leaking into places where it produced nothing but frustration? This is one of the central teachings of Stoicism. The Stoics understood something that many people still struggle to grasp today. The quality of your life is largely determined by the quality of your attention. When you learn to direct your attention consciously, you gain control over your mind. And when you gain control over your mind, you regain control over your emotions, your peace, your energy, and ultimately your destiny. Consider a familiar situation. You are in the middle of a heated argument. Someone says something that instantly triggers you. You feel your chest tighten. Your emotions begin rising. Your mind races to find the perfect response. You want to defend yourself. You want to prove you're right. You want the other person to understand exactly how wrong they are. But have you ever stopped and asked yourself a simple question? Why? Why do those words have so much power over you? Why can a few sounds coming from another person's mouth suddenly change your emotional state? The answer isn't always the words themselves. More often, it's the meaning we attach to them. It's the story we create around them. It's the emotional weight we assign to what was said. We react because we believe something important is at stake. Maybe we think our dignity is being challenged. Maybe we feel our reputation is under attack. Maybe we believe we're losing control of the situation. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The moment you react impulsively, you've already surrendered control. You've handed your power over to the situation. You've allowed someone else's behavior to determine your feelings, your actions, and your state of mind. Stoicism teaches a lesson that is both simple and profound. We cannot control what other people do. We cannot control what they say. We cannot control how they behave. But we can always control how we respond. And that is where real power lies. Not in the situation, not in the other person, but within our response. In those moments of tension, when every instinct tells you to strike back, defend yourself, or prove a point, there is another option, a quieter option, a stronger option, the choice to remain steady, the choice to remain calm, the choice to remain unmoved. There is incredible strength in choosing silence over reaction. There is tremendous power in choosing composure over chaos. Yet most people never realize how often they give that power away. Think about your own life. How many arguments have started because of something insignificant? A careless comment, a misunderstanding, an unnecessary criticism, an accusation that wasn't even true. And after all the energy was spent, what changed? Did the argument improve the situation? Did it bring clarity? Did it create peace? Or did it simply create more tension? The reality is that reacting often adds fuel to the fire. Instead of solving the problem, we become part of it. We become another source of noise in an already chaotic situation. But something remarkable happens when you stop reacting automatically. When you choose to remain calm while others are emotional. When you refuse to feed the drama. When you become the calm presence in the middle of the storm. You break the cycle. You stop giving energy to chaos. And in doing so, you reclaim control over your emotional state. The peace that comes from refusing to engage in unnecessary conflict is worth far more than the temporary satisfaction of winning an argument. Think about how many times you've allowed someone else's words to ruin your day. How many times has a single comment lingered in your mind for hours? How many times has another person's behavior stolen your peace? These are the moments when, often without realizing it, you've allowed someone else to dictate your emotional experience. But this doesn't mean becoming passive. It doesn't mean allowing people to mistreat you. It doesn't mean becoming indifferent to everything. Stoicism is not weakness. It is discernment. It's the ability to step back and ask, is this worth my energy? Is this worth my attention? Is this battle worth fighting? Because not every challenge deserves a response. Not every insult deserves recognition. Not every criticism deserves your time. One of the most important Stoic skills is learning the difference between what deserves engagement and what deserves release. Imagine if every time someone tried to provoke you, you responded with calm silence, not because you were powerless, but because you were powerful enough to choose your response. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you understood the value of timing, the value of restraint, the value of self-control. Of course, this doesn't mean avoiding important conversations. It doesn't mean ignoring genuine problems. Real strength comes from knowing exactly what deserves your attention and what does not. Because whatever you allow to occupy your mind eventually shapes your experience of life. If you constantly focus on criticism, negativity grows. If you constantly replay insults, resentment grows. If you constantly feed conflict, conflict grows. But when you refuse to give your attention to things that do not serve you, something else grows instead. Resilience, clarity, inner peace. You create a healthy distance between yourself and the chaos around you. And that distance becomes one of your greatest sources of strength. If this message resonates with you, consider subscribing and joining us on this journey toward greater self-mastery. Every moment you invest in strengthening your mind is an investment in your future. Now think about the people you respect most. What makes them different? What is it about their presence that commands attention? More often than not, it isn't because they're the loudest person in the room. It isn't because they constantly demand attention. It's because of something much more powerful. Quiet confidence. They don't react to every little thing. They don't chase validation. They don't allow every opinion to shake them. They are grounded, centered, secure within themselves. While the world around them becomes louder and more chaotic, they remain calm. And perhaps that is one of the greatest forms of power a person can possess. This is the true power of emotional detachment. Not the kind of detachment that makes you cold, distant, or indifferent, but the kind that allows you to observe without becoming trapped, to see clearly without being consumed, to remain present without being controlled. At its core, emotional detachment is simply the ability to choose where your energy goes, and that choice changes everything. The Stoics understood this deeply. They believed that virtue was its own reward, not because virtue guarantees success, not because virtue wins every argument, and certainly not because virtue always proves you right, but because virtue allows you to master the one thing that truly belongs to you, yourself. That is where real victory lies, not in defeating another person, not in having the final word, but in maintaining your inner peace regardless of the chaos happening around you. This is what strategic detachment is all about. It's not running away from life. It's not avoiding challenges. It's not pretending problems don't exist. Rather, it's learning how to engage with the world from a position of strength instead of weakness, from clarity instead of emotional impulse, from intention instead of reaction. In many ways, the practice of ignoring is a tool for mental freedom. It allows you to walk through life without being controlled by the opinions of others, without being pushed around by every passing emotion, without allowing every criticism, insult, or distraction to pull you off course. Instead, you remain anchored in your principles, anchored in your values, anchored in the person you have chosen to become. And this doesn't mean disconnecting from everything around you. Far from it. It means becoming selective. It means directing your attention with purpose. You consciously decide what deserves your energy and what does not, what deserves engagement and what deserves release. Because the truth is, the world will never stop testing you. There will always be difficult people. There will always be unexpected problems. There will always be challenges waiting around the next corner. Adversity is not optional, but your reaction to it is. When you master the art of ignoring what does not serve you, something remarkable happens. You stop behaving like a puppet whose strings are controlled by external circumstances. You stop allowing other people to dictate your emotional state. You stop handing over control of your peace. Instead, you become the one holding the reins. You become the master of your own mind. And in that mastery, you rediscover your true power. Of course, this level of emotional control doesn't happen overnight. No one wakes up one morning completely immune to distraction, criticism, or emotional triggers. It is a journey, a process of awareness, a process of noticing your automatic reactions before they take over, a process of recognizing old habits and consciously choosing a different response. Again and again, day after day. Over time, those small choices begin to reshape your character. They reshape your thinking, and eventually, they reshape your life. As this happens, you'll notice something interesting. Life begins to feel calmer, more focused, more intentional. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. The less energy you waste reacting to everything around you, the more energy you have available for what truly matters. Your growth, your purpose, your goals, your peace of mind. Marcus Aurelius expressed this beautifully when he wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." Think about that for a moment. If the quality of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts, then protecting your attention becomes one of the most important responsibilities you have. Every time you refuse to give your attention to something that disturbs your peace unnecessarily, you take back control of your inner world. You reclaim ownership of your thoughts. You reclaim ownership of your reality. And as you begin practicing this consistently, you'll start noticing something remarkable. The less you participate in unnecessary drama, the more stable you become. The less you allow yourself to be drawn into chaos, the greater your emotional control becomes. You stop reacting from insecurity. You stop reacting from weakness. Instead, you begin responding from confidence, from clarity, from strength. You come to understand something profound. The world will always throw things in your direction. Opinions, criticism, provocations, disappointments. But you don't have to catch every single thing that gets thrown at you. You don't have to carry every burden. You don't have to respond to every challenge. The noise of the world remains exactly where it belongs, in the background. No longer the soundtrack of your life. No longer the force shaping your emotions. As your emotional reactivity decreases, your judgment becomes clearer. You begin seeing people more accurately. You begin seeing situations more objectively. You stop looking through the distorted lens of anger, insecurity, or impulsive emotion. And because of that, your decisions improve. Your relationships improve. Your peace improves. In the end, the art of ignoring is not about disconnecting from life. It's not about becoming indifferent. It's not about pretending nothing matters. It's about deciding what deserves access to your mind. It's about protecting your mental space. It's about being fully present without becoming a prisoner of every emotional trigger that crosses your path. It's about discovering strength in restraint, confidence in silence, and peace within yourself, because the moment you stop reacting automatically, something extraordinary happens. You regain your power, and within that power, you discover freedom. The moment you stop handing your attention away so freely, you begin reclaiming ownership of your mind. Think about how much of your energy gets consumed every day by reacting to others. You explain, you defend, you justify, you argue, you replay conversations. You try to convince people who have already decided not to understand. But what if much of that effort was unnecessary? What if you could simply step out of that cycle? Many people thrive on your reaction, whether it's drama, conflict, insults, or constant demands for your attention. They continue because they've learned you'll respond. Your emotional reaction becomes the reward. It becomes the fuel. But the moment you stop providing the fuel, the cycle begins to break. And as you practice this more consistently, you'll begin to realize something surprising. You'll see just how much power you've been giving away without even noticing. Every unnecessary reaction, every emotional argument, every attempt to prove yourself. All of it came at a cost. But now, by stepping back, you're sending a powerful message. A message not just to others, but to yourself. You do not control me. My peace belongs to me. My attention belongs to me. My mind belongs to me. And that realization is incredibly liberating. Not only because it changes your relationships with others, but because it transforms your relationship with yourself. You are no longer living at the mercy of other people's words, no longer trapped by their opinions, no longer controlled by their behavior. And within that freedom, you begin to discover a deeper sense of self. It's interesting how many people mistake silence for weakness. They assume silence means surrender, avoidance, fear, or indifference. But often, silence is exactly the opposite. Silence can be one of the most powerful tools in your emotional arsenal. People expect a reaction. They expect resistance. They expect you to defend yourself, to explain, to justify, to fight back. But when you calmly refuse to engage, the entire dynamic changes. The balance of power shifts. And that's the secret. It's never about avoiding conflict. It's about choosing how, when, and whether that conflict deserves your energy in the first place. Silence is not about avoiding the challenge. It's about standing firmly in front of it without allowing it to control you. It's about understanding that you do not need to prove yourself to everyone who questions you. You do not need to defend your worth to every critic. And you certainly do not need to participate in every conflict that invites your attention. The more you practice this, the more you begin to notice something fascinating. People start reacting when you don't. They become confused. They become uncomfortable. Sometimes they even become anxious. Why? Because they expected a response. They expected resistance. They expected you to play your role in the emotional game they've created. And when you don't, the script suddenly falls apart. They begin wondering why you're not engaging, why you're not defending yourself, why you're not reacting the way they expected. And often, that uncertainty works in your favor, because when you stop reacting, you stop rewarding the behavior. You stop feeding the cycle. The attempts to provoke you gradually lose their effectiveness. The insults lose their sting. The manipulation loses its leverage. The moment someone realizes they can no longer control your emotions through their words, they lose a significant amount of power over you. But here's where the lesson becomes even deeper. The greatest benefit isn't what you're teaching them. It's what you're teaching yourself. Every time you resist the urge to react impulsively, you reinforce an important truth. Your peace matters more than temporary drama. Your inner stability matters more than winning an argument. Your self-respect matters more than proving a point. With every act of restraint, you're strengthening emotional mastery. And emotional mastery sits at the heart of Stoic philosophy. The Stoics understood that while the world may throw endless challenges at us, our response remains ours to choose. That is where freedom lives, not in controlling circumstances, but in controlling ourselves. The more often you practice this principle, the more natural it becomes. At first, it may feel difficult. You may still feel the urge to react. You may still feel the temptation to defend yourself. But gradually something changes. You stop investing energy into things that don't deserve it. You stop chasing the approval of people who don't respect you. You stop getting trapped in situations that only drain your spirit. And little by little, you begin reclaiming something incredibly valuable: your time, your focus, your energy. The beauty of this practice is its simplicity. It doesn't require special skills. It doesn't require lengthy explanations. It doesn't require dramatic action. In many cases, it simply requires you to stop engaging with what doesn't deserve your attention. Nothing more, nothing less. The Stoics believe that your mind is your most precious possession, more valuable than money, more valuable than status, more valuable than reputation, because everything else can be taken away, but your mind remains yours, at least until you voluntarily surrender it. And every time you refuse to react unnecessarily, you reaffirm ownership of that mind. You declare that your inner world belongs to you. It's important to understand that this lesson extends far beyond your relationships with other people. It also applies to your relationship with yourself. Many of us seek validation, because we're uncertain about our own worth. We look outward for reassurance. We rely on compliments, approval, recognition. We allow our emotional state to rise and fall based on how others perceive us. But this creates a dangerous dependence, because when your self-worth depends on external validation, your peace becomes fragile. The more you withdraw your attention from distractions and external noise, the more you begin turning inward. And that's where something powerful happens. You begin trusting yourself. You begin developing self-reliance. The Stoic philosophers repeatedly taught that a peaceful life is not built upon external approval. It is built upon internal alignment. Alignment with your values. Alignment with your principles. Alignment with the person you aspire to be, regardless of what is happening around you. When you detach yourself from the constant need for validation, you strengthen your foundation. Your sense of worth becomes internal rather than external. You stop asking the world to tell you who you are. Instead, you decide for yourself. You define your value based on your actions, your character, your integrity. You no longer require someone's approval to feel at peace. You no longer need universal agreement to feel secure. And perhaps most importantly, you no longer feel compelled to prove yourself. By resisting the urge to react, you gain much more than temporary peace. You develop discipline, real discipline, the kind that shapes character over time. Because this practice is not merely about ignoring insults. It is not merely about avoiding petty arguments. It is about training yourself to become less dependent on external circumstances. It is about becoming emotionally independent. It is about becoming so deeply rooted in your own values that external noise loses its ability to shake you. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." Think about how often emotional reactions consume valuable time. A rude comment, a minor inconvenience, a pointless disagreement, a moment of criticism. How many hours have been lost replaying those moments? How much energy has been spent on things that never truly mattered? When we allow every irritation to dictate our emotions, we waste one of life's most precious resources: our attention, our energy, our time. The Stoics urged us to direct those resources toward something better, toward growth, toward purpose, toward the things that nourish our minds and strengthen our character. Every time you resist reacting, you reclaim a small piece of yourself. And those pieces add up, day after day, choice after choice. Eventually, you discover something remarkable. The more you practice not reacting, the less you feel the need to react at all. The less you depend on other people's opinions, the more freedom you experience. The less you seek validation, the more confident you become. And with that confidence comes a deeper form of strength. A strength rooted in self-mastery. Because ultimately, you become the master of your emotions rather than their servant. And that is where true power begins. The reality is that many people crave attention, especially those who are manipulative, toxic, or deeply insecure. It's part of human nature. We all seek validation in some form. But some individuals go beyond seeking validation. They seek it by provoking others, by creating conflict, by generating emotional reactions. For them, your reaction becomes proof of their influence. It becomes evidence that they matter. And every time you give them that reaction, you reinforce the behavior. You strengthen their belief that they can control your emotional state. You hand them influence over your peace. But what happens when you stop? What happens when you simply refuse to participate? Imagine hearing a dog barking in the distance. You notice it, but you don't feel compelled to argue with it. You don't take it personally. You don't allow it to ruin your day. It remains background noise. What if you viewed certain people the same way? Not with contempt, not with hatred, but with detachment, recognizing that their behavior reflects them, not you. The moment you stop responding to every attempt at provocation, their power begins to fade. The drama loses its grip. The manipulation loses its effect. And your freedom grows. This isn't about becoming passive. It's not about ignoring everyone. And it's certainly not about refusing to stand up for yourself when it truly matters. It's about changing your perspective. It's about recognizing that another person's words, actions, or behavior do not automatically deserve access to your emotional state. You decide what affects you. You decide what deserves your attention. And in making that choice, you take another step toward genuine inner freedom. When you stop reacting, something powerful happens. You reclaim your energy. You stop feeding the chaos that other people create, and in doing so, you create space for something far more valuable. Peace. Think about a situation where someone insults you. Maybe they try to provoke you. Maybe they attempt to pull you into an argument. Maybe they're playing one of those subtle emotional games designed to get under your skin. In the past, your instinct may have been immediate. Fight back. Defend yourself. Prove them wrong. Make sure they understand exactly why they're mistaken. But now imagine a different response. Instead of engaging, you simply observe. You watch. You listen. And then you let their words pass by. Just as you would ignore the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere down the street. You hear it, but it has no real impact on your life. The challenge is that toxic people are often skilled at creating emotional tug-of-war. They know which buttons to push. They know which insecurities to target. They know how to provoke a reaction. And every time you react, you step onto the battlefield they prepared for you. The more you engage, the more influence they gain over your emotional state. The more energy you give away. So what happens if you simply stop? What happens if you refuse to participate? You stop feeding their need for drama. You stop validating the behavior. You stop supplying the emotional reaction they were hoping to receive. Most importantly, you take away the very thing they wanted from you, your attention. And in the process, you take back your power. Think of it like a game of tug-of-war. Most people spend their lives pulling harder and harder against people who are trying to drag them into conflict. But what happens when you simply let go of the rope? Suddenly, there is no struggle, no resistance, no battle. The other person is left pulling against empty space. And you are free. Free to move forward. Free to focus on your own path. Free from carrying the weight of someone else's manipulation. This realization changes everything. You begin to understand that you do not need to fight every battle. You do not need to answer every criticism. You do not need to defend yourself against every opinion. Not everything deserves your attention. Not everyone deserves access to your energy. And when you step back from unnecessary conflict, you create room for what truly matters. Instead of spending your energy on things that drain you, you begin investing it in things that strengthen you, things that inspire you, things that help you grow, things that move your life forward. This is one of the greatest gifts of learning the art of ignoring. You are also learning the art of self-control. You learn how to remain steady while chaos swirls around you. You learn how to maintain inner balance when circumstances attempt to pull you off center. And this lesson applies far beyond difficult people. It applies to challenges, to setbacks, to frustrations, to every circumstance that tries to disturb your peace. Gradually, you become the calm presence within the storm, the steady anchor while everything around you shifts, the person who remains grounded while others become consumed by emotional turbulence. And in that calmness, you discover a deeper kind of strength, not loud strength, not aggressive strength, but quiet strength, the kind that comes from knowing you are in control of yourself. You stop reacting to every noise around you, and instead, you begin creating your own sense of order, your own sense of direction, your own sense of purpose. That is the true power of disengagement, the power of reclaiming your attention and directing it toward what genuinely deserves it. At this point, you may be wondering how all of this applies to everyday life. How do you actually practice it? The answer is surprisingly simple. It starts small. It starts with ordinary moments. Moments that most people overlook. A driver cuts you off in traffic. Someone makes a passive-aggressive comment. A coworker tries to manipulate you emotionally. A friend says something frustrating. In those moments, pause. Take a breath. Give yourself a moment before reacting. And then make a conscious choice. Choose control. Choose composure. Choose peace. Choose to direct your attention toward your goals rather than toward the distraction. The more often you practice this, the easier it becomes. What once required effort gradually becomes natural. Over time, you'll notice a shift. You stop giving your attention to things that don't deserve it. You stop feeding unnecessary drama. And little by little, you begin creating a life that is genuinely yours to control. It's important to understand that this is not manipulation. It isn't about playing games. It isn't about making people chase you. It's simply an observation about human nature. People value what is scarce. They respect what is not freely available. If you are constantly available, constantly giving your attention, constantly sacrificing your time and energy for anyone who asks, your presence begins to feel ordinary, expected, taken for granted. But when you become intentional about where your attention goes, something changes. When you reserve your energy for the people who truly matter, and for the pursuits that genuinely deserve your focus, your attention becomes valuable, and people notice. Whether consciously or unconsciously, they are drawn to that. The principle is no different from how we value rare things. A rare gem, a limited edition masterpiece, an exclusive experience. These things hold value precisely because they are not easily obtained. Scarcity creates significance, and your attention works the same way. When you stop giving it away carelessly, you communicate something important. You communicate that your time matters, that your energy matters, that access to your attention is not something to be assumed. It must be earned. Think of yourself as a rare jewel. Not everyone should have unrestricted access to it. Not everyone deserves the privilege of being close enough to influence it. Just like any valuable treasure, your attention deserves protection. It deserves care. It deserves thoughtful stewardship. This doesn't mean shutting people out. It doesn't mean becoming cold or distant. It simply means becoming more discerning, more intentional, more selective. You stop giving your attention to people who repeatedly misuse it, and you begin directing it toward those who respect it, toward those who contribute to your growth, toward those who bring value into your life. You learn to invest your energy wisely rather than distributing it indiscriminately, because ultimately, where your attention goes, your life follows. Carl Jung captured this idea beautifully when he said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And perhaps nowhere is that truth more visible than in how you choose to spend your attention every single day. In many ways, your attention is a reflection of who you are. Just as your actions reveal your priorities, the way you spend your time and attention reveals what you truly value. When you give your attention away indiscriminately, to anyone who demands it, to every distraction that appears, you unintentionally communicate something. You communicate that your energy has little value, that it can be taken whenever someone asks for it. But when you become intentional about where your attention goes, everything changes. When you reserve it for the people who genuinely matter, for the goals that truly inspire you, and for the pursuits that align with your values, you send a very different message. You show the world that your energy is valuable, and perhaps more importantly, you show yourself that it is valuable. At the heart of this practice is one simple principle: respect. Respect for yourself. Respect for your time. Respect for your emotional well-being. This is not about being rude. It's not about ignoring people out of spite. And it's certainly not about acting superior. It is about recognizing that your presence has value, that your focus has value, that your attention should not be given away simply because someone demands it. Many people move through life feeling obligated to respond to everything, every message, every request, every criticism, every emotional demand. But Stoicism teaches something different. It teaches that your attention is a choice, not an obligation. Respecting your own time means understanding that you do not owe your focus to everyone. Attention should be invested wisely. And when you begin treating it that way, you gradually regain control over your life. You regain control over your peace. Imagine what life would feel like if you no longer felt compelled to react to every person who tried to pull you into their drama. Imagine walking through your day with a sense of calm confidence, knowing that you choose where your energy goes, not them. That shift alone is transformative, and people notice it. They notice when you are not easily rattled. They notice when you cannot be manipulated into every conflict. They notice when you remain composed while others become emotional. Without saying a word, you begin communicating strength. You are no longer another participant in the chaos. You become someone who stands slightly outside of it, observing, thinking, choosing, remaining steady. unaffected by every passing storm. And the impact of this shift reaches far beyond your relationships with others. It changes your relationship with yourself. You stop viewing yourself as someone who exists merely to satisfy the expectations of others. You stop feeling responsible for fixing everyone's problems. You stop believing that your worth depends on how available you are. For many people, this realization is life-changing, because for years, they've measured their value by how much they give, how much they sacrifice, how much they do for everyone around them. But your worth is not determined by how much you give away. Your worth is intrinsic. It exists regardless of external validation. It exists whether people recognize it or not. And once you understand that, something shifts inside you. You realize that you do not need to be everyone's first call. You do not need to solve every problem. You do not need to constantly prove your value. You are enough without exhausting yourself for others. And when you begin withholding your attention from what drains you, you create room for what nourishes you. You suddenly have more time, more energy, more mental space, space for personal growth, space for meaningful relationships, space for goals that genuinely matter, space for peace. Your attention begins flowing toward the things that align with your values instead of being consumed by endless distractions. Of course, this process takes time. For many people, reacting has become a habit. Being constantly available has become a habit. Trying to please everyone has become a habit. Breaking those patterns can feel uncomfortable at first. You may even feel guilty. But with practice, something remarkable happens. It becomes natural. The urge to react begins to weaken. The need to constantly engage begins to fade. And you start noticing the difference almost immediately. You feel less exhausted, less stressed, less emotionally drained. You feel more grounded, more focused, more in control. And perhaps the most eye-opening realization of all is recognizing just how much of your emotional energy was being spent on people and situations that never deserved it in the first place. That realization creates freedom. Freedom from the need to constantly react. Freedom from the pressure of trying to be everything for everyone. Freedom from carrying emotional burdens that were never yours to carry. And with that freedom comes a deeper sense of peace. You begin prioritizing your energy instead of distributing it indiscriminately. You begin investing it where it creates value, where it creates growth, where it creates meaning. And in doing so, you gain something incredibly important. Not only the respect of others, but your own respect as well. You start living according to your own principles. You stop allowing the demands of others to dictate your emotional state. You realize that your attention belongs to you. And every time you consciously choose not to give it away, you reclaim another piece of your power. At this point, you might be wondering, what if someone genuinely needs my attention? What if they're trying to connect? What if they matter to me? Those are fair questions. In fact, they are important questions, because Stoicism is not about disconnecting from people. It is not about becoming emotionally unavailable. It is not about withholding kindness. Naturally, we want to help those we care about. Naturally, we want to connect. And sometimes, the idea of withholding attention can sound cold or selfish. But this is exactly where the Stoic perspective becomes so valuable. True connection is not about constantly giving your energy away, especially when someone only takes and never gives anything meaningful in return. According to Stoicism, healthy relationships are built on mutual respect. Respect for yourself, respect for the other person, and respect for each other's boundaries. When you continually give your attention to people who only consume it, you gradually diminish your own well-being. You shrink your own capacity for peace. But when you choose to protect your attention, you are not devaluing them. You are valuing yourself. You are protecting your mental space, protecting your emotional health, protecting your inner peace. Think about it this way. When you stop reacting to someone's behavior, something interesting happens. You force them to face themselves. Without realizing it, many people depend on your reaction. They depend on your frustration, your anger, your attention. Your emotional response becomes validation for their behavior. But when that response disappears, so does the reward. And suddenly they are left alone with their own actions, their own words, their own behavior. It's a subtle shift, yet an incredibly powerful one, because instead of giving them exactly what they want, you remove their ability to provoke you. And in that silence, they are often forced to reflect, to examine themselves, to see their behavior more clearly. The people who constantly create drama, manipulate emotions, or provoke conflict often survive on reactions. They thrive on getting a rise out of others. They've learned that their actions have power because people keep responding. But once you stop participating in that cycle, their influence begins to fade. The story they've been trying to create no longer has a willing participant. And without your reaction, much of their power disappears. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." And perhaps that is one of the deepest lessons hidden within this practice. Sometimes the greatest freedom is not changing another person. It's understanding why they affected you in the first place. When you stop reacting, something unexpected begins to happen. You give the other person space. Space to think. Space to reflect. Space to confront their own behavior. When someone constantly seeks attention through provocation, manipulation, or emotional pressure, they often depend on your reaction, your anger, your frustration, your defense, your attention. But the moment those reactions disappear, the dynamic changes. Suddenly, they are left alone with themselves. And in that silence, questions begin to emerge. Why do they need that attention? Why do they feel compelled to provoke others? Why do they seek control through emotional reactions? Without realizing it, they are often forced to examine the very behavior they hope to avoid examining. And that is where the balance of power shifts. Not because you defeated them, not because you proved them wrong, but because you chose not to participate. In doing so, you allow their actions to speak for themselves. And often, those actions reveal far more about them than any argument ever could. Of course, this doesn't mean becoming dismissive. It doesn't mean avoiding every difficult conversation. And it certainly doesn't mean shutting people out of your life completely. The goal is not isolation. The goal is awareness. It's learning to recognize when someone's behavior is pulling you into a space that does not serve your peace. A space filled with conflict. A space filled with emotional exhaustion. A space where you lose control over your own state of mind. What Stoicism teaches is the importance of creating boundaries. Not walls, boundaries. A protective layer around your emotional energy. Because the truth is simple. Not everyone who seeks your attention has good intentions. Not everyone who approaches you is motivated by honesty. Not everyone who wants access to your time is coming from a place of mutual respect. Some people want connection. Others want control. Learning the difference is part of wisdom. And once you begin recognizing that difference, you regain authority over your emotional responses. Instead of allowing someone's behavior to determine your mood, you begin deciding for yourself where your attention belongs. You become intentional, conscious, deliberate. When you withdraw your attention from someone who has consistently proven to be manipulative, draining, or disrespectful, you are not punishing them. You are protecting yourself. You are simply choosing to invest your energy elsewhere. Into relationships that nourish you, into people who respect you, into environments that encourage growth instead of conflict, into experiences that leave you stronger rather than weaker. And something interesting often happens when you begin doing this. The people who once relied on your attention begin to notice your absence. At first, they may become more persistent. They may push harder. They may attempt to provoke you even more. They may try different tactics to get the reaction they once received so easily. But now you see the pattern. You recognize it for what it truly is. Not a personal attack. Not a crisis. But an attempt to regain emotional influence over you. And that realization is incredibly freeing. Because the more you practice non-reaction, the more you begin to see how often you are being manipulated without even realizing it. Situations that once felt urgent suddenly appear obvious. Conversations that once consumed your energy reveal themselves as unnecessary. And with that awareness comes empowerment. You realize that you are not at the mercy of other people's behavior. You are not responsible for every emotional demand. You are not obligated to react simply because someone wants you to. You are the one who decides. You decide what deserves your energy. You decide what deserves your focus. You decide what deserves access to your peace. And the moment you stop reacting automatically, you stop playing someone else's game. You remove their ability to control your emotional state. There is extraordinary strength in that decision, a quiet strength, a steady strength, a strength that does not depend on winning arguments or proving points. It comes from something much deeper, the understanding that your peace is worth protecting, that your energy is valuable, that your attention is precious. When you truly understand this, something remarkable happens. You become emotionally untouchable, not because you stop feeling, not because you stop caring, but because you stop allowing other people to dictate how you feel. You are no longer a pawn being moved around by external circumstances. You become the one holding the board, the one making conscious choices, the master of your own emotional world. And that mastery doesn't come from engaging with every situation. In fact, it often comes from doing the opposite. It comes from knowing when to remain silent, when to stand your ground, when to step back, and when to simply let something pass. The more often you practice this, the easier it becomes. Gradually, your perspective begins to change. You start seeing people more clearly. You stop viewing every criticism as an attack. You stop treating every disagreement as a threat. You stop assuming every negative comment requires a response. Instead, you begin seeing things as they truly are. External events, external opinions, external noise, nothing more. And that noise only gains power when you choose to amplify it. When you stop supplying the emotional reaction people are seeking, something fascinating occurs. They are left with nothing. No conflict, no drama, no validation, no emotional fuel. And in that absence, they are often forced to confront themselves, their insecurities, their habits, their motives, their behavior. Meanwhile, something entirely different happens for you. You begin discovering peace, not because the world has changed, but because your relationship with the world has changed. And that is the beauty of this practice. It is available to you at every moment. You don't need special training. You don't need expensive tools. You don't need perfect circumstances. All it requires is a choice to stop reacting, a choice to stop feeding unnecessary drama, a choice to protect your peace. The more often you make that choice, the more noticeable the shift becomes. You stop feeling emotionally drained. You stop carrying the weight of other people's behavior. You stop wasting energy on battles that were never worth fighting. And instead, you begin feeling lighter, stronger, more focused, more energized by the decisions you make each day. You begin realizing that your emotional state is not controlled by the world around you. It is influenced most by how you choose to respond to it. And that realization changes everything. This practice is not about becoming cold. It is not about isolating yourself. It is not about shutting people out. It is about understanding your value, understanding your boundaries, understanding your need for peace. When you stop giving your attention to things that do not matter, you finally have more attention available for the things that do, for your growth, for your purpose, for your relationships, for your future. And every time you withhold your attention from people who seek to drain you, you reclaim another piece of your power. It is a simple shift, yet it is one of the most profound shifts you can make, because with that power comes peace. Peace from the endless search for validation, peace from unnecessary conflict, peace from emotional chaos, peace in knowing that you control where your energy goes. The more you practice this, the more your life begins to feel like your own creation, not a reaction to circumstances, not a response to other people's demands, but a life intentionally designed by you. Yet the deepest level of this practice goes even further, because the true power of ignoring is not only about ignoring external noise. It is about learning when to ignore internal noise as well. Think about it. How often do you give your attention to fears that never happen, to doubts that serve no purpose, to insecurities that repeatedly tell you the same destructive story? Those thoughts can be every bit as distracting as the drama you try to avoid in the outside world. Sometimes even more so. We all know that voice. The one that whispers that you're not good enough. The one that predicts failure before you've even begun. The one that insists everyone is judging you. the one that constantly searches for reasons to worry. And when you allow those thoughts to occupy your mind unchecked, something important happens. You become trapped in the same cycle you were trying to escape. The only difference is that the source of the drama is no longer outside of you. It's inside. And that is where the next lesson begins. The more attention you give to your internal distractions, the more control they gain over your life. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that true strength is not found in controlling the world around you. It is found in controlling the conversation happening inside your own mind. Because every day, countless thoughts compete for your attention. Some deserve it. Many do not. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference. Imagine for a moment that you've just made a mistake. Maybe it was something small. Maybe it was something significant. Now notice what happens next. How does your mind respond? Do you immediately start criticizing yourself? Do you replay the mistake again and again like a movie you cannot turn off? Do you convince yourself that everyone noticed? That everyone is judging you? That somehow this one moment defines your worth? Most people do. And without realizing it, they become trapped in a cycle of self-criticism, a cycle of worry, a cycle of mental reactivity. The truth is, this internal drama is no different from the external drama we've been discussing. It's simply taking place inside your head instead of outside it. The effect is the same. It drains your energy. It steals your focus. It keeps you stuck. Instead of moving forward, you remain trapped inside a loop of negative thoughts and emotions. But imagine something different. What if, instead of feeding those thoughts, you simply stopped? What if you chose not to engage with every doubt that appeared? What if you refused to give your attention to every fear, every insecurity, every imagined catastrophe? This is where emotional intelligence begins. Learning to ignore certain thoughts is not denial. It is discernment. It is the ability to step back and observe your thoughts without becoming entangled in them, to notice them without obeying them, to acknowledge them without allowing them to take control. The more you practice this, the easier it becomes. Gradually, you learn to navigate your inner world with greater awareness. You begin noticing patterns. You recognize familiar mental habits, the same worries, the same doubts, the same fears repeating themselves. And instead of reacting automatically, you simply watch them pass, like clouds drifting across the sky, present for a moment, gone the next. This skill is not easy. In fact, it takes considerable practice. For years, many of us have trained ourselves to believe every thought we think, to react to every emotional impulse, to follow every worry wherever it leads. Breaking that pattern takes time. But as you continue practicing, something remarkable happens. The noise begins to quiet. The mental clutter becomes less intense. The negative loops become less frequent. And slowly, space begins to appear. Space for clarity. Space for focus. Space for peace. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this practice is that it frees you from becoming a prisoner of your own mind. Because if we're honest, much of our suffering doesn't come directly from reality. It comes from the stories we create about reality. We imagine worst-case scenarios. We catastrophize. We assume failure before anything has happened. We fill our minds with endless what-if questions. What if I fail? What if they reject me? What if everything goes wrong? And before long, we are suffering over events that may never occur. The Stoics recognized this tendency. They understood that the human mind can become its own greatest source of suffering. But they also understood something else. We do not have to participate in every thought. We can choose. We can decide where our attention goes. And when you learn to ignore the mental chatter that serves no purpose, your focus naturally shifts toward what is real, toward what matters, toward what you can actually control. Instead of wasting energy on imaginary problems, you begin using the energy to build a better life. You become more productive, more intentional, more effective. The energy once consumed by worry is now available for growth. And that is true freedom. The freedom to choose your thoughts. The freedom to choose your focus. The freedom to decide what occupies your mental space. As you continue practicing this, you'll begin noticing just how much mental energy was being wasted. Thoughts that led nowhere. Fears that never materialized. Concerns that solved nothing. It's almost like cleaning out a room that has been cluttered for years. At first, the mess seems overwhelming, but with every unnecessary item removed, more space becomes available, more light enters, more order appears. The same thing happens inside your mind. As distractions disappear, clarity emerges. And with that clarity comes peace, a peace that extends into every area of life. You become less affected by chaos, less influenced by other people's opinions, less vulnerable to emotional turbulence, and more focused on your own path. The Stoics believe that a good life came from living in harmony with nature, not nature in the modern sense of forests and mountains, but nature in the sense of reality itself, accepting what is, focusing on what is within your control, releasing what is not. This principle sits at the very heart of Stoic philosophy, the discipline of directing your attention toward what matters and letting go of everything else. It is the practice of living intentionally, of refusing to be pulled in every direction by the noise of the world, and mastering the art of ignoring your own mental distractions may be one of the most valuable skills you ever learn, because once you develop it, a door opens, a door leading toward genuine inner peace. You become less reactive, more deliberate, more grounded in your values. Instead of allowing negativity and self-doubt to dominate your mind, you create room for something better: growth, creativity, wisdom, self-respect, and a deeper connection with who you truly are. This is the foundation of emotional resilience. This is the source of mental strength, the ability to face challenges without becoming overwhelmed by them, the ability to stay focused on what matters even when distractions surround you, the ability to continue moving forward with purpose. And as you walk this path, something unexpected begins to happen. The world itself seems to change, not because the world is different, but because you are. You no longer feel controlled by circumstances. You no longer feel trapped by your own thoughts. You stop viewing yourself as a victim of events. Instead, you become the one guiding your own experience, the one making conscious choices, the one directing attention with purpose, the one in control. And that control is the foundation of a life that truly belongs to you. Which brings us to perhaps the most important lesson of all, the final layer of the art of ignoring, the ability to remain fully present without becoming consumed by everything happening around you. Because modern life constantly pulls at your attention. People demand it. Situations demand it. News demands it. Social media demands it. Problems demand it. Every day feels like a competition for your focus. And it's incredibly easy to get swept away, to react to everything, to absorb every distraction, to carry every burden. But what if you didn't have to? What if you could move through life without being controlled by the noise? What if you could choose where your energy goes instead of allowing the world to decide for you? That is the true power of ignoring, not escaping life, not hiding from reality, not withdrawing into isolation, but consciously choosing what deserves your energy, choosing what deserves your attention, choosing what deserves a place in your mind. You remain fully engaged with life, fully present, fully aware, but no longer consumed by every external force trying to pull you away from your purpose. You decide what matters. And once you've made that decision, you stay focused on it. Everything else becomes background noise. When you stop seeking validation from other people and start focusing on your own growth, something extraordinary happens. You discover a kind of power that cannot be taken away, a power that doesn't depend on applause, a power that doesn't rely on approval, a power that remains steady regardless of what others think. For most of our lives, we are taught, directly or indirectly, to seek validation outside ourselves. We look for approval, recognition, acceptance. We want reassurance that we're doing enough, that we're good enough, that we're worthy. And while there is nothing wrong with appreciation, problems begin when our sense of worth becomes dependent upon it. Because the moment your value depends on other people's opinions, you hand in control over your emotional state. Your confidence rises when they approve. It falls when they criticize. Your peace becomes tied to circumstances you cannot control. But the moment you stop chasing that approval, everything changes. You become your own source of validation. You stop asking the world for permission to value yourself. You stop measuring your worth through the eyes of others. Instead, Your self-worth begins to come from within, from your character, from your principles, from your actions, from the promises you keep to yourself. And there is something incredibly liberating about that. Because once your worth is no longer dependent on external approval, you become free, free to pursue what genuinely matters to you, free to follow your own path, free to define success on your own terms. You no longer feel obligated to live according to expectations that were never truly yours. You stop following someone else's blueprint for life, and you begin creating your own. Carl Jung captured this beautifully when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Think about that. Not who others expect you to be, not who society tells you to become, not who gains the most approval, but who you truly are. And that journey begins the moment you stop allowing external noise to dictate your direction. The world will always attempt to pull you away from yourself. There will always be distractions. There will always be drama. There will always be people demanding your attention. There will always be situations trying to pull you into emotional turbulence. That will never change. What can change is your response. The more you practice the art of ignoring, the more anchored you become. You stop drifting with every emotional current. You stop chasing every distraction. You stop reacting to every disturbance. Instead, you remain focused, grounded, steady. Your attention stays directed toward your goals, toward your growth, toward your purpose. And you resist the temptation to become distracted by everything happening around you. Imagine walking through the marketplace of life like a Stoic emperor, surrounded by noise, surrounded by opinions, surrounded by distractions, yet completely undisturbed. Not because you are unaware, but because you understand something powerful. You control your mind. You control your attention. And ultimately, you influence your own destiny. This is not about pretending life is perfect. It is not about ignoring reality. It is not about denying problems. Stoicism never teaches that. Instead, it teaches something far more practical. It teaches that while chaos may exist around you, it does not have to exist within you. You choose where your attention goes. You choose which thoughts deserve your energy. You choose what enters your inner world. And through those choices, you reclaim control. That is where true power resides. Not in controlling the world, not in controlling other people, but in remaining grounded while everything around you shifts. When you stop depending on external validation, you stop surrendering your power. You stop allowing other people to determine how you feel about yourself. You stop allowing circumstances to dictate your worth. And gradually, you regain authority over your emotions, your energy, your actions, your future. You become the architect of your own experience, the master of your own direction, and no external force can take that away from you. Of course, this is a practice. It requires discipline. It requires consistency. It requires patience. No one masters it overnight. But once you begin applying it, you'll start noticing subtle shifts. You'll notice how much calmer you feel, how much more centered you become, how much less influence outside events seem to have over you. Things that once upset you quickly lose their power. Situations that once consumed your attention begin to feel insignificant. The world itself appears less overwhelming, not because it has changed, but because your relationship with it has changed. This doesn't mean becoming detached from people, nor does it mean becoming indifferent. Stoicism is not about isolation. It is about boundaries, healthy boundaries, intentional boundaries, the ability to direct your energy toward what genuinely matters, your growth, your purpose, your relationships, your values, and equally important, the ability to withdraw your energy from what consistently drains you, from negativity, from unnecessary conflict, from distractions that offer nothing in return. The Stoics constantly reminded themselves of a simple truth. We cannot control what happens around us, but we can always control how we respond. And that distinction changes everything, because the moment you stop reacting automatically, you reclaim your power. You stop living at the mercy of circumstances. You stop allowing external events to dictate your internal state. And little by little, you begin building a life that truly belongs to you. A life directed by intention rather than impulse. A life rooted in purpose rather than distraction. A life guided by your own values rather than the demands of the crowd. Imagine moving through each day with that kind of clarity. Imagine walking through life without constantly being pulled into arguments, without being distracted by every opinion, without allowing drama to consume your energy. Imagine directing your attention only toward what contributes to your growth, only toward what serves your purpose, only toward what truly matters. That is the power of ignoring. Not because you are avoiding life, not because you do not care, but because you care enough about your future to protect your attention. When you learn to ignore distractions, negativity, and unnecessary noise, you create space. Space for growth, space for reflection, space for meaningful action. You become less reactive and more intentional, less impulsive and more focused, more aware of where your energy goes, and more deliberate about how you spend it. One of the most beautiful aspects of this practice is that it applies everywhere. In your relationships, in your work, in your goals, in difficult situations, in moments of uncertainty. The art of ignoring allows you to preserve your peace while continuing to move forward. It gives you the mental space needed to think clearly, to make wiser decisions, to stay aligned with your purpose. Instead of being controlled by the chaos around you, you become the calm center within your own life. And as you continue practicing, something remarkable happens. The need for validation begins to fade. The need to react begins to fade. The need to prove yourself begins to fade. In their place emerges something stronger, quiet confidence. A confidence rooted not in what others think of you, but in what you know about yourself. You begin moving through life with greater certainty, greater resilience, greater purpose. And with every step, you become stronger. You learn how to navigate challenges with grace, how to face setbacks with composure, how to remain focused when distractions appear. Most importantly, you discover that real power has been within you all along. The power to choose, the power to direct your attention, the power to protect your peace, the power to create a life on your own terms. By mastering the art of ignoring, you reclaim your focus, you reclaim your energy, you reclaim your peace. You stop reacting to every noise around you and begin living with intention, grounded in your values, anchored in your own strength. Remember this: the world will always try to pull you in countless directions. There will always be demands. There will always be distractions. There will always be noise. But true power lies in deciding where your energy belongs. Stay grounded, stay focused, protect your inner world, and never stop investing in the person you are becoming. Because every moment spent growing yourself is a moment spent building a stronger, wiser, and more peaceful life.